Mr. Samuda, Mr. Holness, Dr. Clark, Mr. Shaw, Dr. Chang, Mr. Montague, Ms. Grange, Mr. Henry, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Mackenzie, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Darrell Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Mrs. Robinson, Mr. Hutchinson, Dr. Tufton, Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Malahoo Forge, Mr. Spencer, Mr. Green, Mr. Terrelong, Mr. Main, Mr. R. Scott, Mr. Azan, Dr. Bloomfield, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown-Burke, Mr. Buchanan, Mr. Bunting, Dr. Campbell, Mr. Leslie Campbell, Mr. Clark, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Ms. Daly, Mr. Daly, Mrs. Dalrymple Philibert, Dr. Dunn, Mr. Fagan, Dr. Ferguson, Mr. Golding, Dr. Guy, Ms. Hannah, Mr. Hales, Mrs. Holness, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Kellier, Dr. McNeil, Ms. Nita, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Michael Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Pickersgill, Mr. Redmond, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Stewart, Reverend Thwaites, Mr. Dwayne Vaz, Dr. Wheatley, Mr. Wright.
Statements by ministers.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to advise that the Prime Minister will be making a statement which will not be now. I will ask for recommittal in order to enable him to do that. But I just give notice of that situation.
Yes, Minister, you may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, just by way of advice to the House as to the planned activities today, we are going to be having from the Minister of Finance, the Bauxite Production Levy Act, Capital Development Fund, CDF, withdrawal order number 1 that will be taken. On legislation at public business, the amendment to the Road Traffic Act 2018 will be taken. In addition, the Bauxite Production Levy Act, Capital Development Fund, of course, withdrawal order will be tabled. I'm advising the Speaker of the House what is expect, which is normally what is the courtesy extended. And in addition, Mr. Speaker, in private members' motion, debate will continue on private members' motion number 2. I don't see the member here. I expect that he will be here, however, because he has a lot of time on radio, etc., to explain the boredom that we are experiencing in the House, but nonetheless, I expect he will be here sometime today. Debate to continue on private members' motion number 7. The same comments apply. And finally, on the debate, we will also continue the debate on private members' motion 41. So, Mr. Speaker, as you proceed, Minister of Finance will take the matter standing in his name.
Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today is the Capital Development Fund Withdrawal Number 1, Order 2018, under the Bauxite Production Levy Act.
Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions, papers, reports from committees. Notices of motion given orally. Dr. Clark.
I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the Bauxite Production Levy Act, Capital Development Fund Withdrawal Order Number 1, 2018. Be it resolved that the Capital Development Fund Withdrawal Number 1, Order 2018, under the Bauxite Production Levy Act, which was laid on the table of the House on the 13th day of November 2018, be approved. Mr. Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I'll move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that the item statement by ministers be recommitted so that it would enable the Prime Minister to make the statement that I gave indications of earlier.
Members, the question is that we recommit statements by ministers. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. Mr. Samuda. Statement by ministers. Prime Minister. Prime Minister Wiley. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister, I was about to disturb you, not to sit, but to tell you that we have a number of students from Hartfield Primary and their teachers who are visiting you here today. We wish to recognize them. And yes, PM, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have two statements, Mr. Speaker. The first one is a brief statement, which is just to correct the record. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in this Honourable House to make it unequivocal and clear yet again that the Integrity Commission is an independent commission of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, let me specifically draw a reference to Section 6.3 of the Act, that is the Integrity Commission Act, the new Act, which states that in the exercise of its powers and performance of its functions under this Act, the Commission, A, shall not be subject to the direction or control of any other person or authority other than the court by way of judicial review. B, shall act independently, impartially, fairly, and in the public interest. And C, shall have the power to do all such things as it considers necessary or expedient for the purpose of carrying out its functions. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, Section 26 of the Integrity Commission Act states that subject to the provisions of the Act, the Commission shall regulate its own procedures. The nature of the establishment of the Commission is that it is an act, it is a commission of Parliament, Mr. Speaker, and it will act independently. And in particular, this commission, the Integrity Commission, is very well protected and insulated from any interference whatsoever from the government. Indeed, anyone who takes the time to read the Act, which is available online, will note that Section 28(1) of the said Act clearly indicates that the Executive Director is appointed by the Governor General, acting on the recommendation of the Commission. There is no role for the Prime Minister in the process. Contrary to the assertion by the parliamentary opposition, I therefore would have played no part in the recent appointment of the Executive Director of the Integrity Commission, whether interim, acting, or permanent. I was neither consulted nor advised of this recent development of the appointment of an Executive Director of the Integrity Commission. I saw it in the media like everyone else. It stands to reason that in accordance with its establishment as a commission, it would have used its own judgment in conducting its affairs, including in appointing an interim executive director. It would not be appropriate for any second guessing or criticism of the exercise of their authority as an independent commission. The Honourable House would recall that this post of Executive Director was proposed as an amendment to the Act in order to strengthen the management structure of the new body. It was posited then that the creation of this post was a better arrangement than having separate directors of the three divisions reporting directly to the Commission, as was stipulated in the previous bill. I think, Mr. Speaker, it is unfortunate that the opposition has sought to make statements which are not rooted in the facts. I therefore consider it my duty to come before this House today to address the erroneous information that has been disseminated. The independence of the Integrity Commission is safeguarded in legislation, and as a responsible government and indeed Parliament, we should do nothing to affect it being perceived as independent. The opposition, by its action, is therefore doing exactly what it says that they should not do, which is attempt to stymie the independence of the organization. And I believe we can agree that this must not be countenanced. Mr. Speaker, the making of such a statement which suggests that somehow the government has a hand in the appointment of the executive director makes it seem as if the government can somehow influence the Integrity Commission. The statement made by the leader of the opposition alluded to Petrojam being under investigation by the Integrity Commission. I want to remind the leader of the opposition that at the time I went to great pains to state that there were independent investigative bodies that are doing their own investigation over which I have no control whatsoever. I couldn't tell you when they were investigating, when they will give their reports. We genuinely now, leader of the opposition, have a truly independent commission. I have nothing whatsoever as Prime Minister to do with the appointment, the structuring, the management of that agency. They run their own affairs as prescribed in the laws which we on both sides of this House passed recently. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Dr. Phillips.
Mr. Speaker, independence should not be taken to mean non-accountability. And indeed, without making it the Prime Minister's responsibility in respect of the appointment of any member of the Commission, there is a role for the Parliament and specifically for the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition in, first of all, the appointment of the Commissioners. The Governor-General, after consultation with the Prime Minister and with the Leader of the Opposition, has a duty to appoint Commissioners. This is a parliamentary commission, the National Integrity Commission, and to that extent it has a responsibility to the Parliament for its actions, and I dare say the Prime Minister is the premier representative of the Parliament with a duty to to the Parliament and through the Parliament to at least advise as to the conduct of these commissions. Now, what is the substantive question that arises? And the Prime Minister has on other occasions ventured in relation to the courts and elsewhere to express concern about the functioning of these co-equal arms of our Constitution. The substantive question that is before us, Mr. Speaker, is that in March, I believe it was, when the Commission came into existence, the National Integrity Commission, three interim commissioners were appointed then in March. Directors. My apologies. And then now in November, another interim appointment is made of a director. Indeed, the Act itself does not contemplate interim appointments, but they have been done. Our view is that the persistence of this interim condition is indeed an unhealthy situation for a variety of reasons. And without making it primarily the Prime Minister's responsibility for this state of affairs, without making it, let me see if I can get it. Without making it his responsibility, we would want him to join with us as members of this Parliament and express our view that it is not a healthy condition for there to be this long period of temporariness in the appointment of the holders of these posts. It does not augur well either for the independence, the enthusiasm, the effectiveness of the investigative activities which are doing. And in fact, it may be appropriate, without trespassing on the independence of the Commission, for an appropriate body of this Parliament to inquire as to why there is this delay in setting it up. The Prime Minister had mentioned the situation in relation to Petrojam and others. I am not trying to direct them how to undertake their investigations, but I'm saying this: among the objects of the organization is to help build public confidence in government. And having a slew of temporary or interim appointees in the face of this slew of allegations of possibly corrupt behavior in a welter of institutions which now fall directly to the Prime Minister's responsibility does not inspire confidence on the part of significant sections of the public that we are making progress in addressing the issue of corruption, which is so rife in the country at this point. So, Prime Minister, I accept your concern that it really is not your direct responsibility, but as Prime Minister, with an interest, as expressed by you, of reducing any reports, allegations, or in fact actual incidents of corruption, we would expect you to share our concern that it is an unhealthy situation to have this number of interim appointments in such an important institution. If you are not the expression of our national concern, then whose responsibility is it to express national concern?
I decided to bring my statement to the House after great consideration. The Integrity Commission has a particular duty which separates it from other commissions, and that is, it is the body that ultimately can investigate all members of this House. More so, it now has prosecutorial powers. So it is almost a special creature now in the structure of our government. Bearing in mind as well, Leader of the Opposition, that it is a new agency that has to now figure out how best to actualize the objectives that are placed in the legislation. Within the scheme of things that it can do would be the consideration of appointing interim directors. It is something that we have to be careful of, that we don't, in making our criticisms, in any way devalue the judgment and integrity of the commissioners in making that judgment. Remember now, the law makes it clear that the operations are theirs to determine, subject to the Act. The Act has not excluded, neither has it specifically said, that interim appointments should or should not be made. And therefore, they are at large with making judgments. Now, I agree with the point that where there are offices that are established for the security of the tenure of the holder, that you should not have interim appointments lasting for any long period of time, and if they can be avoided, they should be avoided. But bear in mind the particulars of the circumstances. This is a new institution trying to establish itself. This House should give it support. I will agree with you that it has taken a little while. But bear in mind as well, Leader of the Opposition, it took us 2 governments and 2 terms to get to this point. Well, literally 3 governments. 3, well, 2. So it takes us a time to get it done. And I would urge the patience of the House, and I would not at this stage in any way question the judgment and good intentions of the commissioners in trying to put together a commission the right way. And I urge the House to exercise patience in this regard. The other thing that I would say, Leader of the Opposition, Speaker, is, members, is that the setting up of the commission requires a certain level, I would say, Mr. Speaker, of careful judgment, because the commissioners are faced with bringing together different institutions. There is the Corruption Prevention Commission, there is the Integrity of Parliament, and then there is the Contractor General, and then now they have to figure out how to introduce the prosecutorial function within it. It does take some time, and yes, and they will. But remember now, they are dealing with persons who are some of them already in posts, some of them have appointments, and they have to figure out, particularly the human resource management issues, how to get that done. The other point I want to make, Mr. Speaker, is that if it is in dealing with commissions that there are concerns about how the commissions operate, then as the Leader of the Opposition had said, the appropriate thing is for the House, through the Parliament, to call in, through the Speaker rather, the House through the Speaker, to call in the Commission, which we have the authority to do. We should. And if that, the route is not to say it's the office of the Prime Minister, because that in some ways suggests that there is executive control over the commission when there is none. So the appropriate thing would have been for a note to be sent to the Speaker, the appropriate committee of Parliament to be assembled, and the commission brought before Parliament. That is the appropriate thing. Mr. Speaker, so as it relates to this commission, that is the Integrity Commission, Mr. Speaker, I again, in closing, repeat my point, that it is a new commission. We should give the commission a chance to establish itself, and we should restrain, at this point in time, any comments which would in any way devalue the judgment and integrity of the commission.
Mr. Speaker, I want to, in light of the comments made, I want to make some things clear. First of all, we are not, I am not, nor are we on our side in any way impugning the integrity of the commissioners that have been appointed, or indeed any of the interim appointees, directors, nor indeed are we in any way making any comment about Colonel Price and the esteem in which he's held. I think it is important, nevertheless, especially in view of the length of time that the Prime Minister has spoken about the time it took for the bill to be prepared, and in view of the fact that despite efforts from 1973, when the Parliamentary Integrity of Members Act was passed, up until the Commission, the Corruption Prevention Act in the 90s, a space of some 20-odd years, there is no doubt that the reputation of government and governance continues to take a beating in the minds of the public. And so I think it definitely behooves this Parliament to indicate to the commissioners that not just that we trust them, but that we consider this matter to be of the utmost importance, which requires diligence and speedy action. We're not trying to direct them, but Jamaica has this problem of corruption being rife, at least as perceived by members of the public. And it can only be addressed not by dilatoriness or delay. It can only be addressed by decisive, vigilant, courageous, and instantaneous action on the part of the person so charged by the Parliament. So, Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister is proposing that an appropriate body of Parliament inquires as to the pace of action, I will agree. And maybe we can depute one of our committees, if it is PAC. There's a committee. Which committee?
Review report. It's a special committee.
You mean to commissions? Well, let us have that. Let us depute the Parliament.
There is. Their standing orders were amended by the Act to provide for it, but it's to receive report and deal with the report.
Wait, 1 minute.
Yield 1 minute. Mr. Speaker, all commissions of Parliament, if there are concerns about its operation, they usually report to the Speaker of the House, and the Speaker of the House call a meeting which consists of the President of the Senate, the Leader of the House, the Leader of Opposition Business in the Senate and the House, which is approximately 6 members who would hear the concerns. So there is also another subcommittee that would hear reports from commissions of Parliament, which is an ad hoc committee that we would like to make permanent. But in terms of any complaints, and in my time, Mr. Speaker, there were many concerns about a few commissions, and we had meetings that we tried to address. So in this matter, in this case, if there are concerns, you ask the Speaker to convene the committee.
Mr. Speaker, if I may, just to further clarify the clarification, the Integrity Commission Act itself amends the standing orders to establish a specific committee for the Integrity Commission, a committee within this House, to address issues coming out of the Integrity Commission. I agree with what Mr. Chuck has said, Minister has said in relation to the way in which commissions generally that report to Parliament or commissions of Parliament, if they have issues, how they are addressed. But it's worth mentioning, that the importance of this particular body is such that there is a specific parliamentary committee established by the Act itself for addressing the Integrity Commission's reports. Yeah. It was amended. It was amended by the statute, member. It's a.
What I would propose to the minister, the member from Southwest St. Catherine, is that we seek advice of counsel, parliamentary counsel, in this matter. Mr. Speaker, I would make just one clarification. Our concern does not rise to the status of complaint yet, but it is a concern that we have with how the new organization is getting up to speed in the face of the urgencies of the moment. And therefore, I would recommend, Mr. Speaker, that this House cause the appropriate committee to meet and inquire of the chairman. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you are hearing me, sir, that we would seek you, as the chairman of the appropriate committee, to secure for us an understanding as to the causes of the delay in getting permanent appointees to be put in place for this very important organization. It brooks no delay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I would never seek to in any way fetter the authority of this House in seeking information or asking for a report from any of the commissions that by law must report to us. I would just say, Mr. Speaker, and remind this House that the Integrity Commission is still in a very delicate stage of its development, and we should exercise a little bit more patience to allow them to at least have up and running the establishment. You may very well get the answer that in trying to move swiftly to put in place some form of establishment, that is why they have had to move with interim appointments. That may very well be the reason. So I'm asking this House to exercise that patience. And Mr. Speaker, if we decide as a House to move, maybe with further discussions between myself and the Leader of the Opposition, we should be very careful how we treat with matters dealing with the Integrity Commission that may expose it to any political divide in its review. They are answerable to the Parliament, but we don't want it to become a political issue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Another statement. Mr. Speaker, I have another statement. Just announce it that there are statements coming. There are statements coming. The new statements are here. Are distributed. Mr. Speaker,
Order, please. Order.
Mr. Speaker, I might very well just sit down and not.
Members.
Mr. Speaker, I use this opportunity to inform this Honourable House of the government's plan for another round in our cyclical disaster mitigation works program. I want to just spend a few minutes to explain that, as I did last year. There are basically 3 cycles of mitigation which the government undertakes. We undertake a cycle of mitigation in April. That's after the rains during that period of time. We undertake a cycle of mitigation just at the beginning of the hurricane season, and we undertake a cycle of mitigation coming to the end or just after the hurricane season. So that cycle of mitigation is in the last cycle of mitigation for the year would be end of October, early November. It so happens, Mr. Speaker, that the mitigation cycle that takes place at the end of October, early November coincides with what we call the Christmas periods. Traditionally, we have called it Christmas work, but it has not always gotten a good reputation. What we have decided to do in the last 2 years is to make the program meaningful. So we have increased the resources to the program, but at the same time we have increased the accountability to the program and the meaningfulness of the works undertaken. Mr. Speaker, this round is crucial. This is this final round, given the levels of rainfall that has been experienced in all parishes. We have seen flooding in areas such as in Maypen, in Clarendon, which claimed the life of a youngster. Mr. Speaker, this program will be implemented by the National Works Agency and the National Solid Waste Management Authority. And the programs will be undertaken jointly and in complement to each other. Mr. Speaker, we know that there is a serious problem as to how we dispose of our garbage. We see it almost every day, where persons throw garbage through their car windows, into gullies, and directly onto our streets. Our drainage system is then compromised, leading to flooding in many areas. Our plan is to deal with this situation, starting with this program. Mr. Speaker, the government, under this phase of the cycle of mitigation, will be spending $997 million over the next several weeks leading into the Christmas season. The program will take on a national focus, and it will be primarily driven by members of parliament. Each constituency will be allocated $12 million to target critical drains, road patching, cleaning, bushing, and drain cleaning. Did I say that? Yeah. So cleaning critical drains, road patching, debushing, and sanitation. We are proposing that the allocation be broken down as follows. For bushing and drain cleaning, which is under one heading, $6 million per constituency. Well, when we say proposal here, we mean that it will be allocated according to the heading, $6 million for bushing and drain cleaning. Let me spend a little time because I'm very cognizant of the fact that when I stand here in Parliament and announce these figures, your constituents are listening and somehow believe that 6 million is 60 million. And that I very quickly say that this is not a lot of money for a constituency. But it can, it's not a lot of money. And we understand as MPs, we know the demands that will come. But yes, so we're coming, yes. So, Mr. Speaker, the $6 million will be directed by MPs. Now, just to be clear, MPs don't get in their hands a check for $6 million for them to distribute. There is no such thing, and I want that to be clear to the public. It is an MP, it is directed by the MP. So the MP will, no, this program is. So the MP will make recommendations to the NWA as to the roads that should be bushed, the roads that can be patched, and the areas that will be cleaned or bulky waste removed, or the drains that will be cleaned. Ultimately, Mr. Speaker, it is the NWA that will go and measure the work, firstly, price it. Well, eventually, yes, they will implement it. They may use a contractor or they may do it directly. And at the end of the day, we have asked the Integrity Commission. Last year, we asked the Contractor General. I want to put on record our thanks. The NWA reported that they were substantially assisted, and it was of great help to us. We're asking the Integrity Commission this year to assist us with verifying the work. I could not announce a $900 million program without at the same time ensuring, especially since it is MP driven, that there is a high level of accountability. So, Mr. Speaker, we have ensured that at every stage there will be checks and balances to ensure value for money. This is not giveaway money, and I want to emphasize that point in the Parliament, because I know that there may be constituents who will be coming to pressure MPs, and some MPs might not be as diligent as they should be in getting the programs implemented. This is not giveaway money. If there is no work, there will be no pay. We must see a meaningful difference in the debushing of our roads. We must see a visible difference in the cleaning of our drains and gullies and the patching of the roads. We must see a difference for spending this volume of money. Last year, Mr. Speaker, we got reports on the work that was done generally across the country, and I would say that most of the reports were favorable, commendable. Constituencies did see significant improvement in the cleanliness of certain areas, the patching of roads. Now, Mr. Speaker, let me note for MPs, $6 million again, as I've said before, for bushing and drain cleaning. $5 million for patching potholes. Again, this is not a lot of money, but it is meant for the MPs to look carefully at their constituencies and see the roads that may not necessarily get the attention of the NWA or the parish council, those roads that sometimes are neglected, those critical arterial roads that just never make it onto the list of the NWA for national attention. This is now the time where you can select your 2 or 3 critical roads and have them addressed. Mr. Speaker, $1 million will come to each constituency for sanitation. This will come through the NSWMA. Now, Mr. Speaker, the last time we did a major program like this, one of the complaints was that after the debushing and drain cleaning, people would leave the bush that they have cleared on the roadside. After they have cleaned the drains, they leave the debris at the drain side only for it to go back in. Now, Mr. Speaker, it is critical that each member of parliament uses this fund from the NSWMA to make sure that after the cleaning and the bushing that you can remove the bulky waste. And usually at Christmas, people are doing their cleaning, buying new things, throwing out old things. There is a need for the removal of bulky waste. So I'm imploring members of parliament to use this to help with the general cleanup in your constituency. Mr. Speaker, we have reserved, and this $100 million, Mr. Speaker, is coming from the TEF. Mr. Speaker, we have reserved another sum. Sorry, the 1 million is coming from the TEF. The 1 million each per constituency is coming from the TEF. So that is not a part of the 900. Within the 900, however, we have reserved $100 million for the NSWMA to do a cleanup of some strategic public areas and thoroughfares which probably will not get the attention of the MPs. So, for example, you know, myself and the Minister of Finance shares a border which is Washington Boulevard. I may not do any work on Washington Boulevard, and he may not. The leader of the opposition and myself, we share a border. I may not do any work on Agley Park Road or on Mullines Road. You may not either. But these roads still need attention from the national agency. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, the NSWMA will, additional, right. So the NSWMA will create a program to deal with these areas. Some areas where there is significant vending. And, you know, we have situations now where, you know, people are using public spaces in ways that are unsanitary. And so the NSWMA will be charged during this season to as far as $100 million can carry them to do some cleaning in critical areas. So, Mr. Speaker, that program will, well, it's not an MP-driven program. This one is not MP-driven. This is national. So they will prepare their program of work. Of course, you can identify and send it. Yes, but remember now, this one is not MP-driven. But you can send in for consideration. Yes. So for this national program, the MPs will be able to send in their recommendations to the NSWMA for areas to attend to. But remember, it is not a significant amount of money. We have to bear that in mind. No, well, just to be clear, that if they are going into any area, then the standard practice is that they must consult with the MPs. In fact, Mr. Speaker, it has come to my attention that agencies are going around and not notifying the MPs when they are going into areas. And I will be recirculating the circular which establishes that practice. Mr. Speaker, let me spend a little bit of time on indicating what the timelines could be like. We would want to start consultations with the MPs this week. After this announcement, MPs should begin preparing their work programs. The work programs should be fairly detailed. The works, the number of persons you intend to hire, your before photographs, and we would target, Mr. Speaker, if you could help me to get the order and attention of the MPs.
Members, let's have
Speaker,
some order.
Work will commence on the 19th of November. We expect that constituents should start working on the 19th of November. I'll address that. Mr. Speaker, we expect that work should be completed by the 7th of December. The 7th. Start the 19th of November and completed the 7th of December. Yes. Measurement and certification of completed works would then start by the 11th. Everything. No, hold on. So we expect to be finished with the certification and measurement by the 11th. And we intend to be paying on the 14th and 15th of December. Sorry, forgive me, the 13th and the 14th. The 13th and the 14th of December. That is the timeline. Now, we start early this year, Mr. Speaker, because I know the complaint. I too have been a victim of it. Where even Boxing Day, persons who have worked have not gotten paid. And it is a travesty because people are depending on their little funds. So the executive director of the NWA is here. He is the one who gave me these dates. So we are going to hold him accountable for those payment dates. However, Mr. Speaker, MPs must cooperate with the program. You cannot deliver your program late and expect to get paid for your constituents on time. So we are urging members of Parliament to follow the program diligently. We have put in place the necessary measures to have the program executed according to plan. And according to plan means that every single member of Parliament will have their programs ready, submitted, works done, measured and certified so we can pay on time. The 13th and the 14th. Mr. Speaker, last year when we did the program in this form, some members of Parliament felt that it would be better not to utilize all the funds all at once. Again, that is your discretion based upon, all the parameters that you have to consider about your constituency. So if it is that you choose to carry over, that is fine, but bear in mind that you cannot carry over the funds past the next budget cycle. So you have to utilize the fund by at least the first week in February. The end date being the first week in February. So, Mr. Speaker, that is the program. I have not called it the Christmas work program. It is the last phase in the mitigation program, the cyclical mitigation program. It so happens to coincide with Christmas. But it is not the giveaway work, it's not borrow work, it's not work that you just expect to get the money and come out and do nothing. You must do some work in this program. The work will be measured and there must be an account of the funds spent. Mr. Speaker, I believe that this program will help many Jamaicans, especially those who are on the margins of our society, who probably would not have a chance of having any employment and receiving any funds at all for the Christmas season, providing, of course, that they do work that is measured and accounted for. Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
I think the Prime Minister is...
Members, please. And I'm going to ask that we address the Speaker so that we don't have discussion across the floor. Dr. Phillips.
No, address don't mean looking at him. Prime Minister, I think it is clear that members of Parliament are hopeful that this program will address some of the urgent, I might dare say, speaking for us here, and I suspect for many there, will address some proportion of the tremendous demands for work in the constituencies. There are a couple of practical questions which you may be able to tell. Is there the usual retention, what was it, 5% or so, which has been a feature of programs like this over the years, and sometimes has resulted in persons working but not getting the... Just when I finish, I soon come. Oh, no, not really. All right.
Mr. Speaker, within the budget requests for this program, the fee to NWA has already been built in. So you are being given the net figure. So you will not be charged any fees for the NWA.
Well, that is very much appreciated. And also, I am presuming that cascades over to the monies with NSWMA and the other agencies as well. But since the Prime Minister has described this as being the phase of the mitigation program, third phase of the mitigation program. But I think what is apparent, Prime Minister, was apparent yesterday in the rains, is that phases 1 and 2, in some way, certainly in the corporate area, or sections of the corporate area, had not been able to allow for the smooth flow of traffic. Yesterday afternoon, I think after what was a relatively short period of rainfall, the traffic congestion in the corporate area, in fact, was unusual. One would say catastrophic. And the question that I have is really, to what extent are we assured that this expenditure will prevent a recurrence in the near term? Well, you see, I'm going to answer you eventually, but you will have to sit there.
Dr. Phillips, please address the
Mr. Speaker, I am always pleased to address you.
You tend to
communicate
otherwise.
It is a real question, and therefore, if it is not that you expect that these expenditures will address that problem, are there other drainage mitigation works that are being contemplated that will prevent the recurrence of the kind of congestion that occurred after the rainfall yesterday, which wasn't extreme as far as I know, the rainfall, but where the congestion in fact was. And that leads to the question as to and without in any way not appreciating, without in any way seeming as if there is not an interest in all of this. I think all our constituencies can identify issues that may not fall into the realm of specific constituency issues, but which are crucial to some of this national traffic flow issues. Is there some mechanism that is contemplated whereby we could convey directly to the works agency or the various regional offices some of these issues that arise, which would make both for drainage, because there are in some gully issues, we have an amount of money here, but there are some issues in relation to gullies that have been long outstanding. Long outstanding, yes. I mean, and I understand this doesn't make the budgetary strictures necessarily any less, but there are some of them which have potentially catastrophic issues where inverts need to be repaired and others. I'm not asking for the money, but I'm asking for the ability to convey where we see these urgencies arising, to be able to convey them directly. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition raised the issue of the flooding that took place yesterday, which caused a massive pileup of traffic. And I will agree that the rains yesterday was not of an unusual amount of rain that fell. It was within what has fallen before, and we would consider it almost a regular occurrence. The issue yesterday, however, was not to do with the drainage infrastructure per se, but more to do with the construction work that was happening on the last phase of the Mandela Highway development, where a particular drainage was blocked by virtue of some of the works, and it was dealt with and resolved. Traffic was cleared up. The Duhaney River came down in force and brought down a certain volume of water that the measures that were put in place just could not contain that volume. And so it had nothing to do with the regular drainage infrastructure. The regular drainage infrastructure, however, is currently under review, and in fact a national drainage plan was done. And based upon that national drainage plan, the NWA is working in a strategic way to repair certain critical drains and gullies, more so gullies than drains. If members of parliament have, a gully, a major gully that is of critical concern, the infrastructure has deteriorated to the point where you feel it is a national threat, let the NWA know. At regular intervals, I review what comes to the NWA in terms of requests. And so, for example, in dealing with Western St. Andrew and South West St. Andrew, we know, for example, there is a major drain there. We don't have the money in the budget right now, but we're going to find the resources, because that is critical. That drain is critical to taking off the water that comes from Spanish Town Road, and it can have an impact on traffic. So things like that, we are addressing them as best as we can within the budgetary envelope. Bear in mind, of course, that we have increased spending on infrastructure such as gullies and drains.
Mr. Speaker, the allocation, because as we are on the topic of drain cleaning, and in the beginning of your statement, you spoke about mitigation program and 3 tranches of mitigation, phases of mitigation. Just to say to you, Mr. Prime Minister, and moving forward, seeing that we have been having, during the summer months, more rain than we have normally gotten over the last couple of years. But the allocation that is made in phase 1, 2, when you talk about rural constituencies, and I'm specifically speaking about rural constituencies, the network of NWA roads, because that's only drains on NWA roads that we can spend it on, is inadequate to scratch the surface, so that when we get this mitigation money here now, because of the lack of cleaning on those drains during the year, because of the amount that we get, which is $1 million, this, even though happy that we are getting it, we are back at square one come by the first quarter of next year. So I would like to implore you that when we're looking at the next budget, I know it would be impossible in this one, that we look at the amounts for drain cleaning. Because if we are to speak about what has taken place in Clarendon 2 years ago, and we have not, or the government itself has not done adequate mitigation in those areas, that it keeps arising every time that you have a rain in Clarendon. I would imagine what will happen across the rest of the island if we are to have an unusual amount of rain. So I'm just imploring that you look at the amounts for mitigation during the phases 1 and 2, especially for rural constituencies. I know you don't want to differentiate between urban and rural, but because of the size of the constituencies, to give it some consideration.
Mr. Speaker, through you I seek to get some clarification as it relates to the aspect of the work that is going to have the involvement of the Member of Parliament. And I say so because there was a protocol established by no other than the former Prime Minister P.J. Patterson to the NWA in writing that any work that is being carried out by the NWA in a constituency, that the Member of Parliament should be notified and also recommend contractors for that particular work. And I raise it because it is an opportune time for a clarification based on the fact, Prime Minister, that in a... Mr. Speaker, I'm asking for some protection. Mr. Speaker, I'm asking for some protection. Shut your mouth.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I don't want anybody to rush me and try and bully me. I am making a statement because I have a reason to do so. Because in a previous work program, I was contacted by the NWA and asked for a recommendation. And given a recommendation, which I did, I was subsequently named in an OCG report as to have done something untoward. So I want to know definitively if this program that we are speaking about, whether or not we will be in a position to be involved. Mr. Speaker, others may not take it seriously, you know, because they were not named. And I am saying to you that I would like a clarification as to whether the Member of Parliament will be involved in recommending contractors for the work to be taken in the upcoming work program. That's all I'm seeking, that I can know definitively how to operate going forward. Thank you.
Questions and answers to questions. Members, before we proceed to the next item as announced,
Mr. Speaker, it's not something that I was saying for no response, you know. I'm seeking a clarification on record in the House from the Minister, the Prime Minister that spoke. What happened?
Mr. Vaz, you're seeking a clarification from the Prime Minister?
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Vaz, have a seat.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr.
I
Prime
have
Minister.
posed a question for which I am seeking an answer.
Order, please. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister is indicating that he will,
Mr. Speaker.
will advise you.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member from... I'm going to address him as a member from West Portland. He raised a matter that is really of parochial interest, meaning parochial to the Parliament, parliamentarians, in two areas. One, what is the entitlement of MPs to be notified when government agencies are doing works in their constituency? I believe that the protocol was established by circular by former Prime Minister Pattison. And as I said earlier in the debate, that I will recirculate a similar circular to remind the agencies that they must notify and consult with MPs. Right? That is absolutely the position of this government and the opposition when they form the government, and that should be maintained. The other position is members of Parliament are oftentimes exposed when they have such programs to administer, because the expectations of constituents and to get these programs effective sometimes places the MPs in what I could only, describe as invidious, because sometimes you get exposed to all kinds of investigations, questions are asked, your motives are questioned, and innuendos made. Which is why when we structure this program, Mr. Speaker, we from the outset build in accountability. And we say to the MPs that they must have a program properly devised, submitted to the NWA, approved, and they take their before pictures and their after pictures. And they should try as best as possible to stay far from handling any funds related to the program. No, and I've crafted it in this language because MPs don't have access to the funds. But sometimes MPs, in trying to facilitate, might say, come do the payments at my office. And I'm saying to MPs, avoid that totally. Stay as far away from that kind of thing which brings the perception that MPs are involved in the distribution of funds. So we have asked the Integrity Commission to assist us, because in doing this program, we have to protect the integrity of this body. Mr. Speaker, we are far down the road of having MPs being involved in assisting central government in the distribution of benefits and in the supervision of works. Unfortunately, that is how our politics has evolved. In other countries, the parliamentarians are not involved in that. But by virtue of the kind of politics that we have, we now have a dedicated fund called the Constituency Development Fund, which is MP-driven, which is very small. But the principle is, should the Member of Parliament be involved in the oversight, administration of works, the delivery of scarce benefits, and so forth? And my view is that it shouldn't. But the way in which our politics has evolved, that's where we are. Eventually, I think this body should try to change that over time. we should definitely over time try to redirect that. But it is what it is as we stand here today.
Members, let me remind members. Mr. Hilton, have a seat, please.
Mr. Speaker.
Please, have a seat. Last week, I supplied every member with a standing order. And Mr. Will you wish to speak? I have allowed Mr. Vaz to ask a question, which maybe I should not, because it is now moving the minister's statement for others to have a debate. Standing order specifically state that is wrong. And so we're not going to have a debate on this. We are not going to have a debate on this. So, Mr. Hilton, if you have a question relevant to the Prime Minister's statement, you may do so, because the standing order permits you to do that. But I am not going to allow a debate. Your Honor, ask a question relevant to what has been presented. Mr. Hilton, you may proceed. Please, so that we can hear you.
Yeah, as you be aware, Prime Minister, Western St. Andrew has perhaps the most drains than any other constituency, certainly in the cooperative area. And the bushing drain cleaning that the 6 million is supposed to address really raises a question as to, for me, as to where do you even begin? Mr. Prime Minister, where we have objectively a situation that some of which I've been writing consistently on. In fact, I had a motion to be tabled here today on the matter that a special representation be made, particularly in the light of some leeway for some works, particularly where some of those work are not only not about bushing and cleaning, but broken drains that exist now, and that threatens significant population in the not only in the New Avenue area, but in the Washington Gardens community as well. So I'd like to make a special appeal because of the particular circumstance of Western St. Andrew and the multiplicity of drains in it.
As it relates to that, I alluded to it. Your drain also affects Southwest St. Andrew. Just last week, I had a conversation about it with the NWA. We are putting together the resources to do it. In fact, we are seeking to partner with the private sector entities that are also potentially affected. We know they pay their taxes, and it is almost, difficult to go and ask them. But the truth is that that drain is a clear and present danger, and we are mobilizing as much as we can, and it will be addressed.
Mr. Speaker, permission to speak from a seat other than my own. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, through you to the Prime Minister, I am extremely pleased that the announcements being made in the statement to Parliament as it relates to the National Mitigation, Sanitation, Drain Cleaning and Beautification Program. My concern is just how this ties in with the promise that had been made earlier by the Minister of Local Government to the local authorities for their drain cleaning and mitigation program. I am aware that many of them have advanced at this point sums of money to do the program and have not been reimbursed. And as pleased as I am as a Member of Parliament to have access to this program so that some work can be done in response to the conditions that arise. I'm also concerned that at the local level, the municipalities are reimbursed so that as we enter November, December, they are not hampered in doing what they can do. I say it because I believe that we have to work together to maintain confidence in every section of government.
I couldn't speak for the Minister of Local Government in this specific matter, but you have raised it, I have noted it, and I will raise it with him. I'm certain that there is some provisions that he has made. I'm just not aware of them now.
Mr. Semudo, questions and answers to questions. Before you proceed, there was a question asked by a member from Central Kingston. Question asked of the Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, if I may just interrupt your train of thought for a minute. Before we close this session, there's just one important point which I neglected to state. In the headings that have been given, which is 6 million for bushing and drain cleaning and 5 million for patching, MPs can move allocations from bushing and drain cleaning to patching, but not from patching to bushing and drain cleaning. Very, very important point to note. You can increase your patching, but you cannot decrease. Exactly. Right. Yeah.
Yes, I was addressing you, Mr. Semudo.
Yeah, Mr.
I wanted to bring to your attention that a question was asked
by the member from Central Kingston to the member of West Central St. Catherine.
Can you deal with them?
And the member from West Central St. Catherine, Minister of Health, has indicated that he has been advised by his permanent secretary, his team, that those questions will be answered at the next sitting of the House, which I will advise at the end of this sitting when that will be. But Mr. Speaker, there are no questions to be answered today. There are none ready to be answered today. And in fact, I will have to have conversation with the member from Central Kingston because he has asked of the Prime Minister questions that are not in the Prime Minister's ministry. So we will have to redirect those questions to the appropriate person who sits in the House who would be able to answer them. And I speak specifically of the member from Southwest St. Elizabeth.
Mr. Speaker, I look forward to that word that the House leaders indicated, but the questions are really long overdue now for answer, and therefore I'd be pleased to know when the answers will be forthcoming. I believe that is the appropriate request I must make of you.
You know, Mr. Speaker, that's very disingenuous of you, my colleague. And I tell you why I say that. When I became leader of government business, you had questions that were here on the order paper for over a year. Today, the question you're referring to is not even 1 month overdue.
Mr. Semudo.
So I think that it is very disingenuous of you to use as a reason for not getting your answer today the fact that it has been long overdue. They are not.
Mr. Twigg, the request from the Minister of Health is in writing and has stated that the answer will be done. You will get the answer in a week's time.
That's no problem. I'm accepting that, Mr. Speaker. The point I was making is in faithfulness to directives that you have given and the House leader have given regarding the promptness of the answers to questions. And that particular question is not inordinately overdue at all. There are others on the order paper in my name that are much longer, significantly longer than that. And it is perfectly reasonable for me to ask when they will be responded to. Isn't that the provision of the standing order which you yourself have told us that we should adhere to? So there's no need for any any acrimony at all.
You know, Mr. Speaker, when we rise in this House, we must rise with a certainty
and honesty
as to the point we are making, the accuracy of the point we are making.
Honesty.
The question to be answered that is the most outstanding is for a question to be answered on the 16th of October, 2018. That question is not even 1 month overdue.
And you should be here.
We meet here once a week. So it is very disingenuous and misleading for the member to use that basis on which to make a point. So please don't bring that kind of inaccuracy to the House. Certainly not to me, member.
Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sittings of the House. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained. Public business. Mr. Shimuda. Dr. Clark.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I now move for a suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise to introduce the Bauxite Production Levy Act Capital Development Fund Withdrawal Number 1 order. Mr. Speaker, as you and my colleagues in the Honourable House are aware, the Jamaica Bauxite Institute was established by the Government of Jamaica in 1975 as a regulatory planning and development agency to manage the sovereign aspects of the government's participation in the bauxite alumina business industry. The JBI was made and is responsible for monitoring and studying the alumina industry and advising the Government of Jamaica on matters pertaining to the industry locally and internationally. Mr. Speaker, the Jamaica Bauxite Institute is funded from levies on the bauxite industry through the Capital Development Fund. Over the last 5 years, Mr. Speaker, the Jamaica Bauxite Institute has received a cumulative amount of $976.76 million in budgetary support from the Capital Development Fund, broken down as follows. In 2013-14, $163.58 million. In 2014-15, $179.18 million. In 2015-16, approximately $200 million. In 2016-17, approximately $211 million. And in 2017-18, approximately $223 million. Mr. Speaker, Cabinet, by way of decision number 5/18 of January 29, 2018, approved $223 million in budgetary support to the Jamaica Bauxite Institute for the 2018-19 financial year. This allocation was also included in the approved Jamaica Public Bodies Estimate of Revenue and Expenditure for the year ending March 2019. Mr. Speaker, this amount represents 87% of the total required by the Jamaica Bauxite Institute for operating expenses and capital expenditure for this financial year, and the remaining funding needs are met through interest income, management fees, and technical services offered by the Institute to bauxite companies, such as testing of commercial supplies. Mr. Speaker, we're committed to only withdrawing from the Capital Development Fund in line with the Bauxite Production Levy Act and in this case to facilitate the budgetary support of the Jamaica Bauxite Institute. The Bauxite Production Levy Capital Development Fund Withdrawal Number 1 Order Resolution is hereby submitted to this Honourable House for approval.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Golden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is an uncontroversial matter. As the Minister has indicated, there has been a pattern over the last few years of funding being withdrawn from the Capital Development Fund to support the financing needs of the Jamaica Bauxite Institute. It's also coming at a time when there have been reports in the media of discussions, for example, in the Senate up to last week, Friday, on the whole question of the bauxite industry and alumina industry and its role in the Jamaican economy. We've been in that industry now from over 50 years. In fact, over 60 years, I believe. And there are strongly held views that we ought to take stock as to the costs and benefits to our country of the industry. We know, for example, that it was at one time the largest, I think, earner of foreign exchange for the country, and at one time was a very significant contributor to the fiscal accounts of the country. Certainly after the oil price shock of the 1970s, the levy, the production levy then imposed, brought in what at that time was really enormous amounts of revenue to support the operations of the government. Over time, things have changed somewhat, and as we know, recently we had a discussion a couple of weeks ago in here about, for example, the fiscal arrangements for the New Day company that mines and exports raw bauxite from Discovery Bay, mined in the hills of St. Anne and so on, and the fact that we are really not collecting production levy from them, but some kind of share of EBITDA subject to a fairly low floor each year. In the meantime, members in this House will tell you of the extent of the environmental and social damage that the industry has foisted upon the people, the residents in their constituencies. Land-related issues, persons displaced from where they used to farm the land and placed elsewhere, often not being able to obtain titles for their new holdings and not being able to farm them either because the land is not fertile or appropriate for farming. We have the red mud lakes to manage and the potential environmental hazards that they present to the water table and to citizens. We have the dust and emissions from the plant and the corrosive aspect of that and affecting residents in the vicinity of the plant in St. Elizabeth and Clarendon and so on. And I don't think should just assume as a country that this is a path that we must remain on ineluctably for the foreseeable future. Yes, we know that there's significant investment on the ground and more to come, and it's very tempting to any government to seek to encourage additional investment in this sector. But I think there has been sufficient concern raised over time by members in this House and the Senate that there really ought to be a proper analysis of the industry from a cost-benefit perspective in Jamaica. You know, if only to set minds at rest if only to set minds at rest. If only to set minds at rest. I'm not proposing any particular outcome of that inquiry. I am just saying that the inquiry, I think, is timely and ought to be pursued. Mr. Speaker, apart from that, we would just, I think, appropriately mention that the JBI is an institution which Jamaica can be proud of. It was an institution that was established in the 1970s, around the same time as the production levy was negotiated and developed, and it acquired a reputation for its expertise over the years and has been headed by some great Jamaicans. One thinks of people like Dr. Carlton Davis and others who have led that institution over the years. And, you know, I don't think any member in this House would question for a minute the appropriateness of ensuring that it is properly funded to meet its operating and capital needs. And therefore, one raises no objection to the proposed motion to approve this order, but uses the opportunity just to say once again that this is something I think as a country we should look at. The environmental issues in particular, way much heavier today than they did 50 years ago. The world facing climate change, facing strains on water resources, air pollution, etc., etc. And I don't think we should just assume that we are on the right path. I think we should check that and test that, stress test that through appropriate independent-minded experts, and just assure ourselves that we are indeed on the correct path when it comes to this very critical industry. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Bunting.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Minister, you may not know, but I can tell you for at least the past 11 years, I almost invariably have to participate in this debate on the CDF withdrawal orders. And I feel obliged to do so because I think there are few constituencies that are more affected, that have been more affected, some would say ravaged, than central Manchester. We've had mining in the south, in the north, in the east. Almost every part of the constituency outside of Mandeville has been affected. We have the refining, the alumina refinery plant at Kirkvine. We have haul roads right across the constituency. We have the mud waste disposal facility on the border with northwest Manchester. We've had relocation of many communities, destroying the social capital that existed there for centuries before. We've had destruction of agricultural land. When you talk about places like Blue Mountain, the Blue Mountain Valley, which a number of our Blue Mountain in Manchester, this is, by the way, members may not be aware, there is a Blue Mountain in Manchester in the Belfield division, where a number of our members have historical roots, known for citrus orchards, etc. All of that gone today. And I have made a number of suggestions repeatedly, and you know, I think it's important just to, without elaborating, to repeat some of them. I've spoken, Minister. Each time we negotiate or renegotiate or we waive the levy, it is an opportunity for us to make changes on our side to whatever the original agreements were. And I have repeatedly said, given our experience of companies going bankrupt, companies closing down, companies being threatened with external sanctions, etc., that we should establish an escrow account that as ore is mined and bauxite is refined and alumina is exported and revenues are being earned, funds should similarly go into this escrow account. No, this is not the escrow account I'm talking about. The escrow account I'm talking about is one that can be used by either the companies or in default by the JBI or some agency of government to do the reclamation work of the pits, which we have seen in the past. Sometimes they're as far as 12 years behind on their obligations to do the reclamation work. It can be used to do other environmental mitigation, such as the management of the toxic waste disposal sites, etc. I've spoken for many years, joined by colleagues now both in the Senate and the House, on the importance of doing this cost-benefit analysis. We just take for granted that is a good thing. And nobody's saying jump up and just shut down the operations. But let us at least know, let us at least confirm, if nothing else, the net economic value. Because there is a cost that we're paying environmentally, that generations to come will pay that cost. There's a cost to this agricultural potential being given up essentially for all time. Because you wouldn't know as an MP, but I can tell you, when even after you've reclaimed a pit, and essentially what they do is slope the sides of the pit rather than have the steep vertical walls. But they slope the sides, they put 6 inches of topsoil on it, and the first heavy rain comes, washes everything down into the bowl. And nothing but scrub can grow on those slopes after that. So they have almost no agricultural potential thereafter. And that is essentially for all times. And the final point that I want to reiterate here is that, and I've made this point from 2008, is although we've had 60 odd years of these activities, when I chaired the Economy and Production Committee and we had hearings, we could not find a single long-term study of the health impact of the operations, not just of the mining, but of the refining operation on the communities and on the workers who have been there. And we get a lot of anecdotal evidence from doctors who operate in the areas, etc., from union work representatives, but we really have not done, and I think we've been derelict in that regard, in getting some long-term independent studies, get the universities, whoever the public health professionals are, so that we understand the full impact in the long term on the health of the communities that live and work around these operations. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Minister is making this withdrawal specifically for JBI. Sometimes withdrawals are done as sort of general budgetary support, transferred to the Consolidated Fund for general budgetary support. This resolution speaks specifically for the JBI. But what it doesn't say is whether it is solely for administration to support the administrative costs of the JBI, or whether there are, and I may have missed it, but I apologize, but I know sometimes there's some token amounts in there to support constituencies where, affected by bauxite operations. And I don't know if this is one such. But I must tell you, recently, I visited Belfield High School. Belfield High School sits on a hill literally overlooking the Kirkvine plant. The parents of these kids would have been, many of them, the farmers who would have been affected by the loss of fertile agricultural land. They come from some of the communities where relocation has taken place. They've been affected by that. Yet this is one of the few schools remaining on the shift system. One of the schools that the former Minister of Education had committed to taking off the shift system by September 2018. Belfield High. Belfield High is, as I said, literally, you can stay in the classrooms at Belfield High and look out at both the Kirkvine plant and the Mud Lake at Kendall. And yet, we have not seen any meaningful contribution to improving the infrastructure at this school to take them off of the shift system and at least return, in a sense, some of the original obligations or the original purpose, return to some of the original, one of the original purposes of the CDF fund, which was to reinvest in these communities for the days when it would be post-Bauxite. And there's hardly a better investment you could make than in the human capital in those young people who are, in a sense, suffering both ways because they're from one of these, not only an upgraded high school, but one on a shift system. So, I don't want to take anything away. The principal, we have a new principal who's working hard. We have a good team. But the infrastructure there is just woefully inadequate. And, occasionally we hear of JBI having a $3 million for the constituency. But that cannot even begin to scratch the surface in terms of the new classroom blocks that we need at Belfield High. And Minister, you well know, as you've described, the carpet don't reach Belfield yet. No carpet up there. They don't even have the consolation of being able to drive or take taxi to go to school on the carpet. So they haven't seen it on the road. Applied to that primary school with almost 600 kids. I mean, these are maybe small in terms of the overall earnings from the bauxite industry, but very meaningful and powerful symbolic things that could be done for the people who have been affected literally for generations by these operations. And I would ask, Minister, that you look, in particular, as I said, in this appeal at the schools. It would be a small amount from what we take out, what we transfer from the CDF year after year to impact taking those kids off the shift system at Belfield High and giving water to the kids at Belfield Primary.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to rise to endorse some of the points made by previous speakers on this issue. I don't know how many members of this House have ever seen the train with the rich Jamaican soil being moved out of Jamaica. I see it every day because it passes straight through my constituency. And every time I see it, it pains my heart because there goes a part of Jamaica. In fact, I think the late John Maxwell said some time ago that 1/3 of Jamaica is bauxite, 1/3 is limestone, and the other is other things. Now, we are busy shipping out the bauxite. We are now busy mining the limestone and shipping away. We are shipping away the country, literally. And one of the things that pains my heart, Mr. Speaker, is when you look at some of the lands that have already been mined out.
Mr. Ascott, just a moment. We are at statement by Minister.
No, it's a debate. Mr. Speaker, you had a transition, but we're actually debating the resolution. So every member has 30 minutes to speak in the debate, according to the standing order.
Thank you very much.
You know that chop.
So, Mr. Speaker and Minister, the reclamation program is a disgrace. And I'm saying that when they bulldoze these huge trees, some of them may be over 100 years old, and you put back maybe 1 foot or less of topsoil, or sometimes 6 inches or even 4 inches. If they at least had planted back some trees, you would have had something to look at. But I have these huge caverns there, and when it's a drought, it is fire just runs through them and the places are desert. And a lot of the water from central Manchester
The hills of Manchester.
and the hills flows right through Scots Pass coming to my constituency. And we have floods regularly. So the flooding that is taking place there is also part of the problems caused by this mining. And so, Mr. Speaker, we have to now agree the cost-benefit analysis must be done now. But equally, the reclamation and the impact on the environment must be part and parcel of this. So while I, with heavy heart, agree with the transfer of the funds, but something must be done that future generations could at least say we benefited. A lot of the money earned from the bauxite and aluminum industry has gone into support Kingston, the capital. Our rural communities are suffering. Minister Spencer over there would know, we suffer now from the fallout of the refinery. Hundreds of homes around there have been, the roofs are gone. And when you speak to NEPA, they are useless. They say it is not the cost. But when we test it, you can smell the caustic miles and miles away from the plant. Trees are now, agriculture is actually suffering. Yields are falling because of this devastation from the mining industry. So, Mr. Speaker, the government, no. We cannot go back to what has happened in the past. We're looking forward. We have to do something positive for the benefit of Jamaica. Thank you.
Dr. Campbell, I think
you
Minister
want to
Tufton
respond.
was...
Your response.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The area of agriculture is the area that provides the greatest level of employment in the country. I believe so. Yes, agriculture is the largest employer of labor in the country. And therefore, one would think that we would take the necessary steps to ensure that we protect that industry as best as possible. In the constituency that I represent, 50% of the employment comes through agriculture. One of those communities is called Meros Box, that literally everyone in the community does some form of farming. And that's really where they get their livelihood from. Students who have gone to universities, their parents are farmers. Pretty much anyone in the community that you can go to and speak to now, they are very au fait with the discipline of farming. And something that we'd like to do in the country is to see how we can increase our productivity, actually. And a lot of these persons who do farming, they still practice some of the older technology, and one would want them to adapt to some newer technologies as to how they can involve some form of mechanization in what they're doing. But when you have the land being dealt with in the way in which the bauxite industry has left some of these prime arable land, the fact of the matter is that these persons are no longer able to carry out what essentially is their livelihood. And there has been a significant impact in the community of Meros Buxton. And the fact of the matter, Mr. Speaker, is that even persons from Southwest St. Anne, represented by State Minister Main, have been relocated to Northwest St. Anne. And these persons who have been relocated are plagued with several issues in their communities. One, they have not received any form of titling for the piece of land that they reside on. Even though they were resettled on it, they still have not received any form of titling for the land that they reside on. And these are persons in Minard. They have very poor roads in their community. So, Mr. Speaker, really and truly, I wouldn't even go as far as asking for carpet. I just want some linoleum, you know. Even some linoleum would do me well in Northwestern St. The issue of having potable water. The Minard well which is in Brownstown, is probably the biggest well in the island. It goes down to about 800 feet. He's not familiar with the term linoleum? You have to use that one next time. Just get it, man. You didn't know what is linoleum? No.
You come from town, you know.
Wow.
I don't know about passes. He's remote from peasant culture.
But, Mr. Speaker, the Minard well in St. Ann, in Brownstown, is probably the largest well in the island. It goes down to about 800 feet. Deepest. Thank you. Now, the persons who have been resettled in Minard. Now, the source is right beside them, with the deepest well in the island, at Minard. And the persons resettled in Minard don't have potable water. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. The source is there. All that is needed is some piping from there to get to the persons in the community so they can have potable water in their homes. And this is not expensive. When we remove funding, Mr. Speaker, I would like to see a more meaningful contribution being made to the development of these communities. And here we have two of them in particular in Northwest St. Ann, Mayor House, Buxton, and Minard, which I think that if we were able to put something meaningful, not the impecunious amount that is normally allocated to a member of parliament, which comes with a lot of restrictions itself, because you're told that you can't really do some infrastructural things like fixing road from it and some other things like that. But to get water to those persons in Minard, I think, is a simple thing, and I think that is a low-hanging fruit that we should focus on. The next issue is that of the health-related concerns. You have persons in areas like Farmtown and Woodstown who have suffered from respiratory and dermatological ailments based on the impact of this mining that has taken place in their communities. Some of these persons who are known to have whatever malady of the respiratory tract, whatever malady of the skin, these persons have now been burdened with the increased medical costs that they have to seek the medical care in order for them to function properly. And so I really just want to add my voice to the debate in stating that there are communities that have been severely affected, and I think that there are more meaningful things that we can do to impact positively on the lives of those persons who reside in the affected areas. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I rise, Mr. Speaker, to speak as Member of Parliament for West Central St. Catherine. And I want to, well, for Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, in recent times, there have been teams in that constituency prospecting for deposits. And I suspect in other areas also, given the bauxite. That's what we're discussing, right? Well, they're already doing gold up there actually, but bauxite. Mr. Speaker, I suspect this is also happening in other areas, given the recent agreements for expansion of production. And I wondered whether or not the minister would consider, if he thinks it's appropriate, some discussions around some of the concerns that have been expressed in areas where clearly there are concerns based on mined out lands and communities feeling as if they have been neglected during that process. For new mining that is going to take place, particularly in virgin territory, virgin areas, like West Central, in Paul Mountain and places of that sort, you know, I certainly would have an interest as a Member of Parliament to meet with those companies
and government to have a discussion as to what can be done to avoid some of the pitfalls that would have occurred in other areas. So I raise that. It's a minor intervention in terms of time, but I think it's sufficiently important because I believe as a country, in the interest of the people, we should learn from any mistakes that would have been made. And we have obviously heard some concerns that I think we should act on going into the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Reverend Tweet.
May I draw the Speaker's attention to private member's motion number 71 on the order paper, which reads, be it resolved that this Honourable House cause to be carried out a cost-benefit analysis of the Jamaican bauxite and alumina industry in order to determine the prudent and efficient use of this diminishing natural resource. And I raise this for two reasons. First, because I think that if this resolution is taken and debated, and no doubt referred to a committee of the Parliament after inquiry and discourse here, it would be a fitting way to bring to a head the concerns that have been expressed in the debate so far today. And secondly, to appeal to you, Mr. Speaker, and the Leader of the House for an early date for this matter to be taken, having regard to the concerns by all of the members affected, and indeed all of us.
Mr. Montague.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. The permission to speak from a seat other than my own.
That's your permitted, sir.
Mr. Speaker, I am very happy for the interest that this matter has generated, and to inform the House that this is very timely because yesterday at the Ministry there was a meeting that I had asked them to hold with the senior ministry persons and the JBI to look at how we can use the Capital Development Fund in the future for the broader development of the country, not only in the bauxite mining areas, but those should be the priority, but across Jamaica, because the mineral is for all Jamaicans. It is not only for persons living in the bauxite mining area. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, I'm told that some 600 million tons of bauxite have been mined since we have started mining bauxite. And we have approximately 1 billion tons in reserve. And we should learn from the mistakes of the past, and we should chart a new course. And in going forward, one of the things I've asked the new board at the JBI is to prioritize the matter of land titles, because I believe it is an injustice where you have moved persons off their land years ago and put them sometimes in a nice home, but they don't have a title to the new piece of land. And we have been looking at this issue over the years, and I've asked them, we have had 3 meetings already to fast track. And I must pay tribute to those ministers who were before me who made the effort. And what we're trying to do is to fast track and to even propose some amendments to the various acts of Parliament to fast track the titling process, because you have some persons who have died without a will, and you get now into the second and the third generation, and the problems multiply. One of the things I personally have as an agenda item for use of these funds, apart from the reclamation and the immediate things in the communities, is to look, Mr. Speaker, at an investment in early childhood education. If we are really going to reinvest into the future of this country, utilizing that mineral when it is gone, education, in my mind, is the best investment that we can do. And early childhood education, in my view, is the best investment, because we have to make some hard choices sometimes for the long-term benefit of our country. And mining, we are expanding mining. There is a lot of interest in Jamaica in terms of prospecting licenses. The people are prospecting, I know, in West Central for gold, for silver, for copper, and then they're using the rivers for semi-precious stones. So there's a lot of activity in the in the mining industry. The whole matter of the provision of water to the various communities is something that we ought to look at. But I want to assure the House and the members here that there's a new look at the JBI as to how not only we don't want to take away the support, the critical support that members of parliament get, small as it is. We still want to keep that, but also to look at the broader picture, to make these critical investments in the country, not only in these communities, but keep a focus on the bauxite communities, and also to ensure that the families get back titles for the lands that they would have given up. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask for a little bit more patience of the House as we move to treat and to chart a new course in how we utilize the funds from the CDF.
Mr. Stewart.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 1 year and 6 days to be exact, I tabled a motion in this Honourable House. It has on the bauxite, because you know that South Manchester has been impacted very negatively as it relates to bauxite mining. The leader had promised that he would be taking this afternoon. I don't know if I can speak as we're related to the bauxite issues here now. Yes. And so, Mr. Speaker, the motion on the other paper, 43. No. But I'll speak then, and I'll. All right. Once I'll get the opportunity, I will reserve. Thank you.
Dr. Phillips.
Mr. Speaker, it is usually the case that this House in the past has routinely approved withdrawals from the Capital Development Fund. But I think the range of comments here today, including from members of the Cabinet, present and former cabinets, and the sentiments expressed show that for both sides, I believe, and for the country as a whole, the question of the bauxite industry's future, its benefits as compared with its costs, are no longer just a routine matter in the minds of much of the population. The member from Central Manchester referred to the Blue Mountain community. I am a child, in effect, or a grandchild of that Blue Mountain community. And I mention it only because I have been able, through that prism, to see the various phases through which this industry has passed. Lands which my grandfather had, which grew oranges and pineapples and coffee and all of those things, which he sold to bauxite companies, although with an agreement that for the rest of his natural life he would remain on those lands, which he did. But if you pass there today, all you see is a chasm. Rich agricultural lands, depleted, and in place a hole left. But it is not just the removal of the soil. What was also removed was lively, enthusiastic, hopeful, collaborating communities
of Jamaicans who use those lands to raise families, send children to school, to sustain life and a vision. It is that that has been lost. And I want to suggest to the Minister and to the Prime Minister that we take the opportunity to take stock of the industry and whither we as a country go in relation to this industry. We have come from the days of hopefulness when bauxite was a synonym for progress, when to get a bauxite job was the pinnacle of achievement for a person in St. Anne, Manchester, St. Elizabeth, Clarendon. And when it became the kind of technological frontier of a modern Jamaican industrial development. Everybody wanted to work in bauxite. Bauxite was developing dairies, and farmers were getting extension services from bauxite, and we're all going, no. We are in a situation where people complain. The complaints have been echoed in this parliament. There's a feeling that it is an imposition, a detriment to health, a detriment to communities, a detriment to future development. But the truth is we are at the end. And we have to examine what it is we have to show for it. We are, Mr. Speaker, witnessing the death throes of the Capital Development Fund. Because if truth be told, the new revenue arrangements herald the complete depletion of the Capital Development Fund. The $1.50, you can clarify for me, as far as New Day. No, the 17% is not the levy. We do not, as far as I understand it, that money is not going to go into the Capital Development Fund. You can correct me, but it is not. The Capital Development Fund receives the levy. So the profit sharing is not going to go into the levy, nor is the $1.50, which is taxes otherwise, going in royalty, not going to the levy either. The minister indicated, when we debated this last, that he'd be willing to review the profit sharing agreement. But the truth is, it is what you would call an evergreen arrangement. It can only be amended, having examined the agreement, if both parties agree. We can review it, but if the other party does not agree, then the present arrangements are in place unless by some other means we abrogate it. So we are stuck with that. The most favored nation treatment or most favored company treatment is going to inevitably lead other companies, if they consider it favorable, to seek similar treatment to New Day, and thus a further blow against the levy will have been struck. That's one issue. The fact of the matter is, This Capital Development Fund, when established in the late 1970s, was at the forefront of fiscal planning of the day. It was the precursor to what we know now as sovereign wealth funds. It was the design that we were going to take this depleting resource, put it into a fund so that it didn't get mixed up with other revenue flows, but would be there for what it was described to be, a capital development fund that would carry us to a day when the bauxite would have disappeared, but we would have had, whether schools and educated population, something for a post-bauxite future. One lesson, collectively, and I'm not casting blame on one side or the other, but one lesson of this is that we never did it. We defined the fund, but all of us, including both sides and myself, various ministers of finance, have come and routinely withdrawn money from that capital development fund to put into the regular consolidated fund and just use it for housekeeping. So capital development went by the way. Yes, but it's a collective bad management. So, well, let us learn. Let us collectively learn. Let us collectively learn that we collectively have wasted our resource. Yes. All right. No. Now, we need to take stock of where we are. Having wasted that resource, and at the point now where we are going into the final 20 years of reserves, we have to decide as a country. Huh? Well, we're about 20, 25 years, I am told. But a lot of that extra reserve is now lower quality reserve in bauxite terms. And it involves relocation of our communities. What I would want to urge in light of this whole, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to have to ask for your protection. You know. I don't really want to compete with the member from Central Clarendon. But I think I am saying something which, to me at any rate, and I suspect to others, is of some merit to our consideration. Thank you. What I would want to urge, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister is that we maybe as a start for this consideration, ask the Bauxite Institute to spearhead the appointment of a Blue Ribbon Commission, including our academic community, including experts in the area, including the fiscal issues to be taken into account. And let us come to a stock taking before we go too far further down the road. Let us ask a report. Let us appoint them by means of some consultation, not restricted to the Parliament, but including the Parliament. Let us come to some assessment after such a report would have been produced. Let us consider it here, and let us ensure that for whatever time we have a future in bauxite and alumina, we ensure that the optimal benefits flow to the country and that we get more than we have lost so far because of errors that have been collectively made along the way. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Minister Clark.
Mr. Speaker, I think that the level of interest that this, on the face of it, simple motion has generated is testimony, one, to the vibrancy of the Parliament, and that and various members representing their constituencies, which is refreshing to see and goes against what is often, a stereotype that is at many times false. Mr. Speaker, I just want to introduce some of the economic facts, because right now things are going well in Jamaica. We have the lowest unemployment in at least 40 years. No, allow me to make my point. This represents the best economic times in terms of opportunity that we have experienced in a very long time, and therefore we have the luxury of the kind of debate that we're having. The bauxite and alumina industry, since its inception, has contributed approximately $2.5 billion to the capital development, through the bauxite levy. Okay? $2.5 billion. Now, since inception, but a big chunk of it, since it was in 40-odd years, since it was introduced in 40-odd years, approximately $2.5 billion. And the truth is, as many people have alluded to, and as the member here alluded to specifically, it's not clear that, collectively speaking, various governments of Jamaica have been the best stewards of that $2.5 billion of resources that have come. But it's important that we acknowledge that, which seems to be a fact but needs to be established, and don't mischaracterize and misdiagnose, i.e., the fact that certain problems exist is not necessarily due to the fault of the bauxite industry, but surely some of what we describe even here today is due to our own failure, meaning collective failure of various governments, to properly steward the resources, the significant resources that have come from the bauxite and alumina industry. At this point in time, the bauxite alumina industry is still very significant to the Jamaican economy. The 2.2% growth rate that we had for the first quarter of this financial year, which is the highest first quarter growth rate in 10 years, the bauxite and alumina industry grew by over 30%, a major contributor to that growth. The bauxite alumina industry today, the last figures that we have for 2017, employed 3,700 persons directly, and in the context of Jamaica, where the average income is just over $5,000, the earnings from bauxite jobs is a significant contributor to the country. And the 3,768 people who are employed in the bauxite alumina industry today represents the highest number, and I'm using a 2017 figure, represents the highest number of persons employed in that industry in 10 years. So I say that to say that while we hear some of the arguments being made and the observations being made, I want to just remind the House and indeed Jamaica of the significance of the bauxite alumina industry to our country. The exports from bauxite alumina today and for the last 10 years have averaged about $650 million. our total exports, Mr. Speaker, are about 1,600 million, i.e. 1.6 billion. And therefore the bauxite alumina industry represents over a third of Jamaica's exports. So it is something that is crucial to our very existence. And while we can express our concerns and make our observations, I think that we should do so with due regard to the significant importance that the industry plays to our economy, and to not confuse how various governments have over time stewarded the resources of the bauxite alumina levy with the importance of the industry to the Jamaican economy. I can't make that clear enough. As a minister responsible for finance, I want just to make that abundantly clear. Well, nobody, Mr. Speaker, I don't think any person in the debate so far spoke to these figures. Okay? And in a debate of this nature, when everybody's talking about the pit and so forth, it is important that somebody speaks to the significance of the bauxite alumina industry to Jamaica. It represents over a third of our exports. It represents some of the highest paying jobs in the country. It has people who are indirectly employed. It is at this point in time an indispensable part of the Jamaican economy. And Mr. Speaker, we sat and listened patiently to all the contributions. To all the contributions.
Members.
Sat and listened to all the contributions. And now we're making the economic contribution. Okay? The environmental perspective has relevance and is important. And others do. But right now, since nobody saw it fit to speak to the economic fundamentals, economic realities of the bauxite alumina industry, it is my duty to speak to the value of the bauxite alumina industry to the communities right across Jamaica and to the impact that it has on our economic livelihood. I am speaking to the economic impact of the bauxite alumina. Okay? Right. So, no. All right, Speaker, we're not supposed to be speaking on our side. So, I want to, with some of the concerns, Mr. Speaker, that have been addressed, are concerns that better fall into the avenue or into the realm of how we should distribute resources in the national coffer, right? Recognizing the importance of the bauxite alumina industry. The point you mentioned about Belfield Primary and Belfield, legitimate point. The way to address it may not be, and I'm going to don't choose my words here. The way to address it may not be to adversely affect the bauxite industry, okay? But the way to address it might be through the allocation at the national level. And I believe I've heard the Minister of Education speak to a program to removing many of the schools that are on the shift system to be an off-the-shift system. And I believe, from my perspective, a priority should be schools in the areas where companies are contributing to the national coffer to the extent that the bauxite industry is. So I'm recognizing the concern you have raised and suggesting that the way to address the concern is to recognize the economic importance of bauxite alumina, and in the national sort of distribution of resources, allocate in a way that's consistent with addressing that concern. Mr. Speaker, when this motion came for me to present, I must confess, sort of taken aback, because my my view on the Capital Development Fund has always been that it should be reserved for capital items. And I was advised correctly that over the past 10 years, the practice has been to use the Capital Development Fund to finance the Jamaica Bauxite Institute, because the Jamaica Bauxite Institute is connected with helping us get the revenue. Right? And over the last 10 years, that is what we have done. And I'm pleased to say, Mr. Speaker, that over the last 10 years, we have not, the governments that have, over the last 10 years, since the last time was maybe 2009, but over the last 10 years, we have not drawn from the Capital Development Fund outside of funding the Jamaica Bauxite Institute. Okay? There is a balance in the fund. The balance as at the end of, Mr. Speaker, as at the end of October was approximately 1.8 billion. So that's before this withdrawal. So legitimate questions have been asked in that regard. Just to respond to a few things specifically, Mr. Speaker, the JBI will be using it for administration and capex. The member from Central Manchester asked, it was in my speech. As far as the member spoke about, brought up New Day, just to remind that he is correct that it's $1.50 that goes into the levy, and 17.5% of EBITDA goes into the consolidated fund. But just to remind that, large companies fund themselves with equity and debt. When they fund themselves with debt, their covenants are based on EBITDA, i.e., the covenants that they have to meet at the end of the financial year. So EBITDA is not something that only the Jamaica government has an interest in, but their bank has an interest in, and therefore it is going to be calculated on objective bases, because the bank itself measures the performance of the company vis-a-vis EBITDA. I believe various members here will be familiar with that. It's not going to go to the CDF. Yes. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, all of those very useful remarks, I would ask your permission to put the motion to the House for approval.
The question is that a motion be now approved. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Ayes have it. House Leader.
I would invite you now to call on the Minister of Transport and Mining to deal with the item, the amendments to the Road Traffic Act 2018.
Mr. Montague.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We had started debate on the amendments, the 5 amendments. But before I ask for other members who would wish to contribute to the... Yeah, man. I said before I ask, I would like to place on record every single parliamentarian, on the behalf of every single parliamentarian, that we want to express our sympathies to the families of victims who have died on our roads. We have actually passed the target we set for this year, 300. We are at 309. And I'm sure everybody will join me in expressing heartfelt sympathies to the families of those children who died on the streets of St. James this morning. Mr. Speaker, it was a horrible accident, and it therefore brings into focus what we are about to do today in looking at the amendments to the Road Traffic Act. At this time, Mr. Speaker, I'll ask for other persons to speak on the tabled amendments.
Mr. Phillips.
Yeah, man, sit here. It's in your order. It's on, no, he has, yeah. Mr. Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, before I deal with the amendments, because, we on this side also express our sympathy to the parents and the school community that the 2 students attended. And as the Minister mentioned, Mr. Speaker, of the importance of this Act itself, the bill that we're speaking on, Road Traffic Act. Mr. Speaker, I would like to express our disappointment on this side on how long it has taken for us to bring this Road Traffic Act to complete all the works that is to be done with it, as we have not seen and for some time, because the bill was tabled in 2014. It went to a joint select committee and was reviewed and concluded February 2015. Was passed in the House on Tuesday, November 10th, 2015. We had the election of February 2016. The new road traffic bill was passed again by February 2018, passed through the Senate in May of 2018, and 6 months after, we're still not able to get the Act itself gazetted. The regulations themselves, I think the Minister and we in here have been waiting on the regulations, and it seems to be some time off before the regulations are completed. But, Mr. Speaker, to the amendments that have been tabled by the Minister, we on this side really don't have any challenges with what has been tabled. The only challenge that I have, Mr. Speaker, is to deal with the regulations and the section to do with the sections to do with the provisions giving the Minister to deal with the surveillance. That the regulations themselves, the electronic surveillance, that aspect will not come to the Parliament for affirmative resolution or for approval. Well, the Act itself does not. So we're asking that an amendment be made. So you have taken the decision to carry that, especially that section, because what the Act itself says is that it only the sections dealing with prosecutions that will come to the Parliament, from the regulations that will come to the Parliament for affirmative resolution. So we're asking that it be added to the list of sections that will come. Well, Mr. Speaker,
Where are the regulations? When are they coming?
it would be good to know when the regulations will also be coming. But I think the country is urgent of finding out when it is that we will get this Act gazetted, signed off by the Governor General and gazetted. We keep on, from the inception of tabling this Act, speak about the importance of public order and how it will help to reduce the number of road fatalities that takes place. I think we should find a way, just like how the government itself found a way in finding the time and the short period of time in bringing the needs to Parliament, rushing it through Parliament, bringing it into being, that we should find the same urgency in dealing with this Road Traffic Act in the same way, so that we can do what is necessary by this Act in helping to mitigate in the chaos that is happening on our roads. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure there are members on this side would like to add, but from where I stand, where there are no objections to the amendments.
Mrs. Malone.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to support the further amendments to the road traffic bill. And Mr. Speaker, I too share the concerns expressed by the Minister about what is happening on our roads. And just to highlight that these further amendments, it is important that all motorists understand what is happening in the House today. We're moving above and beyond where we have been. And by virtue of Clause 105, owners of motor vehicle should clearly understand that they become liable for the use of their motor vehicle. No longer are offenses limited to persons who drive the motor vehicles, but the owners themselves will be liable, because under the new system, when a notice is issued by way of ticket, then the notice shall have the effect as if the owner of the vehicle was driving the vehicle. This is the modern era of electronic surveillance, and persons have to understand that greater care is required. Mr. Speaker, it is my firm belief that these amendments will go a long way in helping to restore order on our streets and in helping to ensure that persons who use motor vehicles understand that they must exercise utmost care. Owners who do not drive will be held liable when persons use their motor vehicles to commit offenses under the law. I support the amendments. May it so please you, Mr. Speaker.
Dr. Guy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. May I be allowed to speak from a seat other than my own? Mr. Speaker, I too want to join in supporting this particular amendment to the legislation. And I want to echo the comments of my colleague, the member from Northwest Manchester, who agonized over the long period of time it has taken to reach here. Mr. Speaker, the heavy lifting for this piece of legislation took place prior to the tabling in 2014. And we had a joint select committee, and the report was presented to the Parliament in June of 2015, a year later plus. This bill was retabled in September 2016, and it was passed in February 2018, 1 year and months later in the lower house, and in the Senate in April 2018. My contribution in January, February 2016, when it was debated in the House in this year, Mr. Speaker, was a recommendation then that the government could look at electronic surveillance as it related to the vehicles that were committing the infractions. I then indicated that even though that was required in today's system, we should not delay the bill, but to have it assented and passed so that it can come into law. I am happy that good sense came into the picture, and we are looking at that now. Because, Mr. Speaker, many of us see the problems on the road. Many of us recognize that the challenges we're having on the road and the indiscipline, the mayhem, the madness that takes place on the road is not confined just to the ordinary private driver, primarily. Some do. but the taxi men who operate, the taxi drivers who operate these vehicles are the main offenders on the road. And in the main, they are not operated by the owners, but any driver who comes along and presents his driver's license to him and he wants a job, he will get the job. I'm happy that this particular amendment is seeking to tackle and to connect the owner through the license plate by electronic surveillance to the driver so that the vehicle, the owner, can be ticketed. Mr. Speaker, a former superintendent of police, in his own inimitable style, said that these mad drivers are like flying missiles across the stoplights. You only need to go to the intersection of King's House and Lady Musgrave and see the taximen going on the outer lane when they should be veering right, and then cut across the line of traffic and go. Sometimes they don't even wait on the light to change. They anticipate the movements across the stoplight, and they are missiles for the oncoming vehicle from the other direction or across the stoplight. Mr. Speaker, we need, the Minister mentioned today that we have surpassed the target we have. Targets are targets, but all of them are lives. We need to cut down on the amount of lives that are lost on the road each year by these mad drivers. And I'm happy that this amendment is there. My concern, though, Minister, is that we need to roll out more of these, whether Jamaica Eye or whatever, Traffic Eye, right, where we need to have more of these surveillance cameras at the intersections, at the stoplights, and have these drivers aware, through their pockets, through the owners, that we are concerned as citizens, as lawful citizens, about the state of affairs on the road. If we don't, Mr. Speaker, we are going to reach a situation where they may create more deaths than the criminals with the guns out there. So, Mr. Speaker, I support this particular piece of amendment. I said so were you not talking earlier, member. I do agree, and I want to support this and hope that the regulations that govern this will come to this Parliament very shortly so that we can have a complete bill and that it will be the law very shortly. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Bunting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just very quickly, Minister, I support these amendments as well, and I think it closes one loophole. But there's a similar loophole which I don't believe needs legislative amendment but can be done administratively. And that is where you have bus owners, public passenger vehicles, who use a series of drivers. The drivers are perhaps unsuitable. They get a whole heap of tickets, they don't pay them. They no longer employ that driver, they get a new one, the same thing happens. So in the course of a year, this bus could pick up scores of tickets. And because the driver badge, I think they were called, is issued as a separate exercise from the bus owner's PPV license, there is no incentive for the owner to exercise greater supervision and discipline on the drivers. And we know what has happened. The member from Northeast Manchester and I have shared tragedies over the years with buses from Mandeville to Christiana that have met in many fatal accidents, some even worse than the one this morning. And I think if we made that additional link, and I don't think it requires a legislative amendment, but it's the same principle that is here, where the owner has to share some responsibility for, in a sense, the servant, who would be the driver that he employs to drive the public passenger vehicle, and that be one of the criteria that's used in renewing the road license for those vehicles. Thank you.
And I'm not going to be long, Mr. Speaker. to avoid any sidebar comments. Mr. Speaker, I want to place on record, from public health perspective, the importance of this bill. I think it's important because The cost, Mr. Speaker, from road traffic fatalities, it is astronomical when it comes to the public health system. I was looking at some numbers recently, and one case in particular, taken from a piece of work, research done by a trauma specialist. In fact, it was a former principal at the University of the West Indies, where one motorcycle victim who was not wearing his helmet got into an accident, ended up at the University Hospital of the West Indies, and total cost of care over a period of time was just under 20 million Jamaican dollars. In fact, 17 million plus Jamaican dollars. One victim. And the assessment of that particular case, Mr. Speaker, suggested that if that person was in fact wearing his helmet, irrespective of any other error that he may have, that would have resulted in him having that unfortunate situation, the cost would be nowhere near that. And so I raise the point to say that the amendments, what we're discussing here is critical not just to the victims, intended or otherwise. It has a significant impact on the public health system. The challenge, however, with the law, once it would have been completed and passed, Mr. Speaker, is the enforcement. That's the second point I want to raise, because even though in the current legislation there are clearly specified rules of engagement on our roads, the enforcement issue is a big issue. Too many of our, whether it's pedestrians in terms of crossing the street, or it is a driver or passenger in terms of seat belts, too many of our Jamaicans just do not observe the laws. And as a consequence, most of these accidents are caused by human error of one kind or the other. And so I really want to say that one of the things that we're going to have to do once we move this process forward, which I fully support, is focus heavily on the enforcement side, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Mr. Golding?
No, I didn't. Ahmad spoke on the issue of whether we should debate it last week, and I asked you for a week so we could have a proper debate. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support the bill and to make 2 points. First is a somewhat personal point. This bill is the first major overhaul of our road traffic laws in a very long time. It represents the joint effort of successive governments. As has been said, significant work was done over many years to develop it. The previous government, of which I was a member, tabled it here. It was passed in the lower house after a joint select committee review. It went to the Senate, it was debated in the Senate, and then the elections came. It was retabled by the current government, has passed in the House, gone to the Senate. The Senate amendments have been approved, and we had the unusual procedure of having further amendments brought here for approval after that. And I think this only because those amendments are so important and I think potentially beneficial that one would endorse that particular further delay in the process. But it is a personal matter because my father, the late Professor John Golding, was the founder of the National Road Safety Council and was a pioneer in a lot of the reforms to improve road safety in this country, including the wearing of seat belts, the wearing of crash helmets, and so on, and structured the National Road Safety Council with the endorsement of the government of the day so that it is actually chaired by the Prime Minister himself or herself, which ensured that road safety would be given a certain centrality of attention within the government and also facilitate the cross-cutting into ministerial collaboration which is necessary to address road traffic issues. And as has been indicated, by the Minister of Health. It has a major health impact, it has a major law and order impact, and an impact on the economy as a whole. So I know that he would be very happy to see us reaching so close to the conclusion of this very important legislative process, and it has certainly my support. The other point I wish to make was to kind of highlight the significance of this particular amendment, because I don't think it is fully understood how significant it is. What we are doing here is we are saying that in relation to ticketable offenses, which are the subject of electronic surveillance capture, it is not only the offender who is liable criminally, but the owner of the vehicle. This is a novelty, or certainly an innovation in our law in relation to road traffic. And I think it is an important step towards greater accountability for how drivers behave on the road. I, in fact, would like us to consider at some point soon that principle and whether it should be extended. As the member for Central Manchester indicated, we have a situation where the economics of a lot of the privately owned component of the public transportation system often involves commercial arrangements whereby vehicles are owned by investors who buy vehicles to make a return, and they have drivers who drive for them. And often the way in which those drivers are remunerated is in a way that a return has to be made for the owner first before the driver gets a return. And it encourages the kind of driving that we have on the road. And we have a system with the Island Traffic Authority and the Transport Authority where there is no effective mechanism for ensuring that the owner of the vehicle is held accountable for the performance of that vehicle on the road when it comes to licensing. In the Public Accounts Committee this year, we were looking at that issue, and we were flabbergasted, in fact, that there was no methodology being employed to ensure that an owner who has a vehicle that is the subject of multiple tickets is prevented from having that vehicle relicensed, where there are outstanding tickets that were occasioned while that vehicle was being driven. So this principle of having owner accountability for the way in which the vehicle is driven, especially where there's an economic interest that the owner has in that vehicle being driven, and it's being driven for reward for the owner, that accountability, I think, needs to be enhanced. And this is a first step, and it's a very significant legal step, which I don't think we should overlook its importance and its novelty, because it represents, I would say, a new chapter in the accountability of persons on the road. That is not just the driver who commits the offense, but the owner becomes liable for that. Of course, the owner doesn't incur demerit points, which is very reasonable because he or she is not the driver of the vehicle, but the liability for the fine is there. And that is a significant potential, I would say, incentive to ensuring that the vehicles are driven in a proper way on the road. And we hope that the electronic surveillance capacity of the country will be intensified over time, because it will not only affect road traffic matters, but crime and violence more generally, and law and order more generally. It is used to great effect, as we know, in such capitals as London, for example, where CCTV provides law enforcement with tremendous capacity to track down and hold criminals accountable for their actions. So, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to kind of make that point, because I think it would otherwise perhaps not have been so clearly understood by members who may not be of a legal background. It is a very significant move that we are making in passing this particular amendment. Thank you.
Mr. Montague.
Mr. Speaker, let me first of all thank all the members for their contribution, and to treat with the couple points that were raised. Mr. Speaker, while the member from Northwest Manchester has expressed his disappointment, I'm sure he would also be expressing his glee that he has participated today in the final debate in this House on this bill. Mr. Speaker, it also needs to be known that that the regulations are being drafted. Well, I think we have gone 4 drafts already, but we have to wait until all the amendments, because as you know, the process of this bill, every step there has been additional amendments, and we wanted to make sure we have all the amendments, all the provisions, and then bring the regulations as soon as is humanly possible. Mr. Speaker, there was the point for us asking that a certain section of the bill didn't require those regulations to come to Parliament. I had committed to take those regulations nonetheless, but the call has been made that we should have them as a requirement that they come to the House, because it is novel, we're breaking new ground, and the more scrutiny we can give, the better it is. And therefore, under clause 110, we want to propose a second amendment to read in subsection 4, delete the words, quote, subsection 3, and substitute thereafter the words subsection 1 AB or subsection 3, end of quote. And that would ensure that the regulations for all of the provisions of the bill are laid in the Parliament for the scrutiny of the members of the House. Mr. Speaker, also the whole matter of the capacity of the country to enforce the electronic monitoring. That capacity is increasing as we speak, because almost all the major intersections in the corporate area, in Maypen, Mandeville, Montego Bay, Ocho Rios, already have the means to monitor these intersections electronically. And the Ministry of National Security, I am very positive, they are rolling out hundreds of new cameras within the next 3 to 4 months across other towns in the country. So therefore the capacity, and the NWA through private partnerships are moving to get traffic cameras separate from the normal CCTV cameras at intersection, but specific traffic cameras to do speed, to the lane change and stoplight violations. The House should be aware that when we still pass this bill, the existing Road Traffic Act will remain in force, because there's a provision to have it in force until all of the legal processes are complete. The point raised by the member from Central Manchester was an excellent point with regards to the ITA, issuing the badges as against the points being accumulated. In the 16-point proposal going forward for the public passenger industry, one of the points is that a driver would automatically lose his badge if he accumulates more than 10 points. So it will be automatic, because we are linking the databases, and that is why the ITA has been brought specifically into this, so that the ITA can match as the keeper of the database for all motor vehicles. And therefore, when you superimpose on that the ticketing database, the driver database, you will capture everything. That is to prevent the person from licensing the vehicle and to renew. That's for the owner. But I'm saying the driver also. You have a driver who is driving, he has accumulated points. There are some drivers on Reddills Road, who have 400 or 500 tickets, and they are allowed to renew their driver's license. This bill will correct that. You will have a situation where a driver accumulates hundreds of tickets and he still applies for a badge and gets the badge. But once now you link the databases, the Transport Authority will be seeing his record and therefore can deny the badge. And that is why we are saying, if in the time when he has a badge, he has accumulated more than 10 points, the Transport Authority automatically will suspend that badge. And he ought not to be driving in the public passenger industry without a badge. So that the linking of the databases will have the badges suspended, and once he clears the points, the badge can be reinstated. So that this is the first step, because the next step is to have the Land Transport Inspectorate or Authority We will be merging the Transport Authority, the Island Traffic Authority, anything to do with land, to merging those. So we are getting there, so that we are making giant steps and crafting breaking new ground in the legal realm. And in closing, Mr. Speaker, I want to pay tribute to all the ministers previous who played their part in this long journey. I have had the privilege and the pleasure of running the final leg. The baton was passed by my star sprinter from Central, and he got it from the member from South St. Andrew, and he got it from another member. And we are saying, yes, under Prime Minister Golden. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, the two leg of the race. And this is what you call join up government in its real way. And that we are at one for the benefit of the people of Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, with that I thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, at this point I'm going to ask if you could put the amendments to the House.
Those in favor?
The amendment to the amendment first. Thank you.
Those in favor of the amendments? Those in favor of the amendments to the amendments? Those against? Ayes have it. I now put the amendments as amended. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. House Leader.
All right, Mr. Speaker, it was of course intended to have the presentations by the member from Central Kingston with two motions standing in his name. Motion number 2 and motion number 43. No. He's not. I wish he would advise you, Mr. Speaker, as Honourable House, if he is prepared to take which of the two motions, because my understanding in the corridors is that he intends to make an adjustment to the treatment of those motions. So I invite you to ask him to advise the House as to how we will proceed from here.
Reverend Tweets.
Mr. Speaker, I think we could complete number 2 very quickly. There having been very considerable debate on the motion prior to this, unless there are any other contributions. I'm so sorry that we haven't had a direct contribution from the Ministry of Education, as far as I'm aware. But I'm prepared to close that now.
House Leader.
No, Mr. Speaker, I paused to give the member from Southwest St. Elizabeth an opportunity to respond. But in the event that he has heard what he wants to hear and he has heard enough, I would invite the... Are you going to make a contribution? No. Well, we want to close that debate today, really.
I'm ready.
Mr. Speaker, I wish you would invite the member from Central Kingston to close the debate.
Mr. Speaker, I hesitate to demur, but it would really be an anomaly if a motion to do with mathematics and science education did not have the contribution of the Ministry of Education. The public would think this is a huge default. Now, in the circumstances, I am ready to close, but if indeed the minister from that ministry wishes some time and you and the House will indulge him, I'm quite happy to postpone. It would be really, really bad if the ministry doesn't do it.
Okay, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of State in the Ministry of Education is prepared to make a contribution next week. So I ask that if it's permissible, we would do just that. All right. In the case of the other resolution standing.
Mr. Speaker, would the House Leader just indicate which one he's referring to? Whichever one is in my name, I'm ready to go. But
see the member in whose name it is, and that is the member from Northwest St. Anne. The member from Northwest St. Anne had indicated that he did not wish to have the debate continue, the motion continue. He wanted to terminate the motion, but he's not here so to do. So in the absence of that, Mr. Speaker, you see, Mr. Speaker, we are trying to get these motions debated, because that's the purpose of the House. I'm not, as is well known. So, Mr. Speaker, I've had discussions with the member from Southern Manchester, and he is willing to take the motion standing in his name at 43. So I now invite the member to make that presentation for us.
Mr. Stewart.
Mr. Speaker, permission to speak from a seat other than my own.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, if I may crave your indulgence for a moment. I am reminded that today is not the day for private members' motions. It is normally held on Thursday. So I am asking that we move for the suspension of the standing orders to permit private members' motions to be taken today.
Those in favor? Aye. Those against? Ayes have it. Mr. Stewart.
Mr. Speaker, and permission to speak on a seat from my own.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, the motion being put forward was tabled in this Honourable House 1 year and 7 days to be exact, on the 7th of November, 6 days, 2017. And it speaks, Mr. Speaker, to the bauxite industry. I wish we had taken it earlier before what went on. But I'll read the motion, Mr. Speaker. Whereas bauxite mining has been taking place in the parishes of Manchester, Clarendon, and St. Elizabeth, St. Anne for over 4 decades, and whereas a number of constituencies within these parishes have been impacted in a negative way, causing tremendous destruction to flora, fauna, orchards, and farmlands, and the general environment, and whereas a number of these constituencies and in particular South Manchester, have seen no significant benefits being derived from these mining operations, as our roads and general infrastructure are in deplorable condition. There is no pipe water in many of these communities, and there is general environmental degradation. And whereas the said constituency has suffered negatively from mining operations and has a legacy of open pits and citizens suffering from respiratory diseases, and there is uncertainty as to the benefits, as to whether or not the benefits outweigh the costs in today's world. And whereas the bauxite levy has been replaced with a profit-sharing proposal that is yet to be explained as to the benefits that will accrue to these mining areas. And whereas the Capital Development Fund has approximately 890 million United States dollars, and whereas over the years these funds have been used to purchase shares in Jamaica Public Service Company, the cement company, rice factory, and forest industry, and whereas these investments have not directly benefited the constituency, be it resolved that a cap be set on the amount that can be transferred from the Capital Development Fund to the Consolidated Fund, so that meaningful infrastructural work can begin in the constituency after waiting for over 40 years. And be it resolved that there be a restoration of the bauxite levy, and that there be extensive rehabilitation of bauxite lands, and that these lands be returned to the farmers. And be it further resolved that this Honourable House debate the concerns regarding bauxite mining operations in the parish so affected. Mr. Speaker, the motion being put forward this afternoon speaks volume about the impact of bauxite mining in our country, but more so on the constituency of South Manchester, which I have the honor to represent. Mr. Speaker, when one examines the cost benefits to the constituency of South Manchester, any objective-minded Jamaican would agree with me that the citizens of the constituency have not benefited from bauxite mining. As a matter of fact, bauxite mining has made them poorer in many instances. Mr. Speaker, before the advent of bauxite mining, the constituency had many small farmers and landholders, and they were able to sell their fruits from their parcels of lands, fruits such as tangerine, oranges, grapefruit, shaddock, naseberry, June plums, star apples, to name a few of the fruits which grew in abundance. They were sold to assist in paying their land taxes. These small farm landholders, Mr. Speaker, were also able to sell their crops such as pimento, coffee, and other growing provision to subsidize their earnings. Mr. Speaker, many of these landowners have been relocated for over 2 decades and have not been able to get their land titles. They are asking and they are appealing to these bauxite companies, to the JBI, to assist in the process. Mr. Speaker, as we speak, in some of these areas, the small farmers can't even find place to rear their animals. And Mr. Speaker, what have these hardworking, honest, committed, and dedicated citizens gained from bauxite mining? Nothing much as compared to what they have sacrificed. As a constituency which contributes significantly to the GDP, you would want to believe that some of the billions of US dollars which a country earns from bauxite mining would be plowed back into the constituency for major infrastructural work. But what do we see, Mr. Speaker? The worst roads, no portable water supply, citizens suffering from respiratory diseases from the bauxite mining dust. The photographs there show the open pits, which are left unclaimed. Areas such as Harmons, Asia, Lancaster, Rose Hill, Lewis Field, Ellen Street, Swabies Hope, Spur Tree, French Park, Pewsey Hill, to name a few, have been left denuded. Mr. Speaker, during the 4 years of bauxite mining, there is really nothing to show. We have not had a school, a hospital, a clinic, or a training center built by the bauxite companies in Jamaica. We have not seen a faculty of any at any of our universities funded by our bauxite companies or the Bauxite Institute to study such an important mineral. Mr. Speaker, the monitoring of bauxite mining operations is carried out by the JBI, which is based in Kingston, which gives the citizens the impression that they're abandoned. And the only way they can get justice sometimes, Mr. Speaker, is by demonstrating and blocking roads from time to time. This should not be so. Mr. Speaker, I have been asking for a local office of the JBI to be established in the parish of Manchester in order to closely monitor mining operations and be that voice for the citizens. We know that the JBI is based in Kingston. Mr. Speaker, yes, there are a few persons who have benefited from a little dust nuisance money, trucking off water to a few black drums, a few scholarships, and some community outreach programs each year. Tokens. A few persons have gained some low-paying jobs. But, Mr. Speaker, as soon as bauxite mining is exhausted in these areas, these benefits are terminated in many instances, and these citizens are left with health-related issues, poor or no infrastructure, and many other domestic-related problems. Mr. Speaker, I am therefore asking that something be done. What will be the legacy of the bauxite mining operation when they cease? Sinkholes. I posed this very question at a community meeting last week, Wednesday night. What will be the legacy of bauxite mining in South Manchester? And the residents shouted in unison, Kashamaka MP and sinkholes. We now have several open pits which have not been reclaimed. Some of them are now storage for water, which pose threats for our young children. Many children yet unborn, Mr. Speaker, will only know some of the fruits which once grew in abundance in their backyards from the pictures in storybooks. Many of these mined-out pits, which have been there for over 2 decades, will still be there. The poor roads, no water supply, open pits, denuded hillsides will still be there if a concerted effort is not made to correct what has happened in the past. Mr. Speaker, we have seen what has happened in Linden, Guyana, a bauxite mining area where citizens have been left destitute, poor and sick, and unable to pay their medical bills. No electricity, and citizens barely able to eke out a living. That is happening in Guyana. And if we don't take stock, Mr. Speaker, South Manchester and other mining areas may be beneficiaries of these negative mining operations. Many of our once independent citizens in South Manchester are now poor and destitute because of bauxite mining. Mr. Speaker, I believe that serious attention needs to be paid to our bauxite mining areas. The citizens deserve no less. The government must protect the citizens. Mr. Speaker, the constituency of South Manchester has contributed significantly to the GDP of the country. And yes, the citizens are proud of this contribution, but all they're asking for is a small piece of the pie. Mr. Speaker, several public bodies have benefited from the resource of bauxite mining, as stated in the motion tabled. Bauxite is now fetching premium price, a time when the bauxite levy has been removed and replaced with profit sharing, which has not been fully explained. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the emotive issue of profit sharing versus return of the bauxite levy, the citizens of South Manchester have to contend with heavy equipment, as shown on the video there, mining their communities. They have to contend with the trucks transporting the precious red earth each day, with nothing coming their way. Mr. Speaker, as a member of Parliament for the constituency, I'm calling for the restoration of the bauxite levy. I'm also asking for a percentage of the bauxite earnings to be used for infrastructural development in the constituency. Roads and proper water supply in particular. Mr. Speaker, the citizens in these mining areas are appealing for help, I therefore ask that some serious consideration be given to this motion today. Mr. Speaker, an impact environmental study needs to be carried out. A cost-benefit analysis of the bauxite industry must be done, and be done early. Mr. Speaker, members of this Honourable House, I thank you, and I trust that we have listened and we have heard, and something will be done to our bauxite mining areas. I thank you.
House Leader? But nobody has.
Suspend the debate.
Mr. Speaker, it is not intended to close the debate today, so we will continue. We will continue the debate next week when other members are here. That would make a conclusion. I would just say, though, that I consider the debate well prepared, well presented, and very thought-provoking for every member of this Honourable House. So, Mr. Speaker, it is not intended to do any further business today, so I ask that this House be adjourned until next week Tuesday at 2 p.m.
The question is that the House now be adjourned until next week, Tuesday at 2 p.m. Those in favour? Those against? Ayes have it. This House now stands adjourned.
Hi, I'm Neveline Williams-Mills, Jamaica 400 champion, and you're watching PBCJ People's Station.
Even when I am off duty, I am a force. Service above self.
Keep we island clean, so clean. From the peaks to the beach, so clean. No dirty up Jamaica, please don't do it. Keep we island clean, so clean. From the peaks to the beach, so clean. No dirty up Jamaica, please don't do it.
No dash no paper, no dash no plastic. Dispose your garbage responsibly. No know how to recycle, learn it quick. And if you drop it, better pick up every piece of it. Plastics last forever, don't forget the bits. Cause when them touch the street, them end up in the sea. Collect pan the reef where they fish them feed. And when you want seafood, I eat your
Keep
eat.
the island clean, so clean. From the peaks to the beach, so clean. No dirty up Jamaica, please don't do it. No dirty up Jamaica, no dirty up Jamaica, no dirty up Jamaica, no dirty up Jamaica.
Start your day with some encouragement from New York Times best-selling author and practical Bible teacher Joyce Meyer.
God is not mad if we've not arrived. He's just happy that you're here today wanting to learn more.
You'll be refreshed and strengthened as you hear powerful messages of hope and transformation.
God, I want you to lead me and guide me, and I'm going to do what you want me to do. I don't care what it costs.
I do have a dream, and I know you have a dream, that we can make Jamaica the place of choice for you to choose to live, to work, to do business.
We are going for the Jamaica we want. Making steady progress to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals in our National Development Plan, Vision 2030 Jamaica. We have teamed up with valued partners, working through strong institutions to reduce inequalities in our society. We commit to being responsible in our production and consumption, ensuring we build sustainable communities in harmony with nature. Jamaica is making significant strides in providing quality, lifelong education for all, enabling our people to be engaged in decent work to drive economic growth, equipping men and women with the skills to build resilient infrastructure, promote sustainable industry, foster innovation, and utilize new technologies. Urgent action is being taken to manage natural resources responsibly, protecting clean water sources, ensuring access to water and sanitation for all, diversifying to alternative energy sources, conserving our environment and sustaining life below water and on land. Jamaica is making moves to ensure healthy lifestyles for the well-being of our people. We're promoting sustainable agriculture to achieve food security, improve nutrition, and end extreme hunger, putting in the work to end poverty in all its forms. We're on track in achieving our Sustainable Development Goals through realizing our Vision 2030 Jamaica. We will leave no one behind.
And I'm chilling right now, 'cause we're winning right now.